Thanks everyone. Hi, we appreciate you joining us today. Just our quick kind of standard disclaimer. This presentation is for educational purposes only. It's not legal advice. It doesn't create an attorney-client relationship. We'll have some information at the end on contacting us if you have some specific questions. Also, so you can get on with your day, we'll move through this information at somewhat of a brisk pace because that helps you be able to keep moving, as we noted. So we're going to start off, Dan's put up a poll question, but we're also going to start off with just kind of a performance review overview, just to kind of get everybody's mind in the right place of what we're discussing today. What is the definition of a performance review? It's a formal assessment in which a manager evaluates an employee's work performance. Now that might sound pretty self-explanatory, but as we go through this today, you're going to see quite a few pieces of information that are going to need to be taken into account as you perform a performance review on your employees. You look at it to look at strengths, weaknesses, areas for improvement. I mean, that's pretty self-explanatory, but again, there's other kind of deeper issues that need to be considered as well as you go through that. They're not required by law. It's not a federal law that you provide performance reviews to employees. However, it's considered a best practice for an employer to do performance evaluations. We'll get into more depth on why that is, but just it's not required by law, but it is considered a best practice. It can benefit you as an employer in quite a few ways. You know, your employee work performance can be better. They can be more efficient. They can be more productive if you're giving them a performance review consisting of feedback on their performance and how they're doing. Workplace fairness and objectivity can be developed by use of a performance review. Employees feel that a workplace is more fair and objective with a performance review process in place. In other words, they're not surprised by anything. They kind of understand that people are being evaluated for their work. And then finally, employee attitudes can be improved if they feel more engaged through their work, and their overall just participation in the organization itself can be enhanced by using performance reviews. So assessing individual work performance, you can learn a lot actually by using performance reviews on a specific employee. If you really break it out and get into all the areas of what an employee is doing, you can look at their actual performance. Are they hitting specific targets that you as an organization need an employee to hit? What are the strengths of the employee? You know, how are they doing well? What are some of the weaknesses? Where are they lacking their skills, or do they need some specific training or experience? That's something that can be brought through with a performance review. How's the attitude of the employee? Do they positively or negatively affect your overall employee morale? What are some of the employee's professional goals? You can get information through a performance review on what they would like to see in themselves for increased success. And you can also kind of judge job satisfaction with a performance review, get direct feedback. How does an employee actually feel about their job? Another area of assessing individual work performance through a performance review can help you as an employee or an employer to make decisions or to support a decision on what you would like to do with an employee if there's any sort of issue that might come up. You know, the decision could be whether to promote an employee. Performance reviews are used to assess their performance. Sounds self-explanatory, but you want to see how productive they're being. Are they meeting the goals as we discussed? How are they fitting with other people? Those are good indicating factors on whether or not you want to consider retaining an employee or promoting them. A review can also be used to evaluate whether someone should receive a raise. Do they need an increase in their base compensation due to their good performance? Also, it can help with whether some sort of incentive compensation can be used with an employee. You might make a decision based on a review of, are we going to use a bonus structure to help motivate somebody? Does an employee need a performance improvement plan or PIP as it is known. You can go through and discuss issues with an employee, getting that information and feedback from them, plus documenting how they're doing through the review process can help you as an employer evaluate if you need a PIP, and then have facts and notations backing up why you need a PIP. And we'll talk about in a little bit why that's so important. Also, a review can be used should an adverse action be taken with an employee's job. Do they need discipline? Do they need a demotion? Do they need to be fired? So those are some of the ways that doing a performance review can help you assess how somebody is doing. Another important function of a performance review is to compare employee groups and job categories. This is useful overall as an organization. You can really look at everybody within the organization globally and then see how these different individuals are doing within the groups, and then you can compare the different working groups or whatever different types of employee job groupings you have, compare against each other and see how things are really going overall for the organization. It can help you identify outstanding employees, those that have the superior quality of work, they're meeting their production goals, they're working well with others. That's a function that can come out of a performance review. You can also see who the underperforming employees are, and that again, when we're talking about these different working groups, that can be within the specific groups themselves, but also comparing that group to a different group of employees. Maybe you've got employees that work in the field compared to employees that work in the office, things along those lines. This is a useful process for seeing how different groups are doing. You can look at areas of focus for training or recruiting as you compare the different groups. You can get feedback from them on how they feel they've been trained, if they've been trained enough, do they need more training, what could the company do better. There could be some targeted training even identified for specific individuals within a group if they need some skill development. This also helps you as an organization when you're doing these reviews and comparing the different groups to adjust your recruiting to make sure the new hires have the training they need. Also, supervisor training can come out of this type of comparison through a performance review. That's a hugely important thing for any organization, is having your supervisors and managers properly trained to make sure they have the skills needed to do their jobs and also protect your organization. You really do want to measure information on your manager and supervisor abilities through something like a performance review, because you can hear from the direct reports how these individuals are doing. Or from an organizational standpoint, are they undermanaging, overmanaging groups of individuals? Do they need to be trained additionally, your supervisors and managers, or do they need some sort of corrective action because they are overly affecting your morale negatively? That's the kind of information that you can get when you're looking between the different groups of employees to get an overall global view, again, of how your organization is doing. Just a couple quick points of caution on this slide that I want to make you aware of. The first is, if you're comparing these different groups of employees, you've got to look at potential disparate impact issues. That means if employees in a protected class are receiving worse reviews from a particular supervisor than employees who are supervised by the same individual who are not in a protected class, that could be an indication of an issue with that supervisor within the organization. You've got to look at that disparate impact issue can cause liability for your organization. You also want to make sure that there is not a bias that is getting inserted into these group comparisons based on a protected class status again. So just be aware, if you're using these bigger comparisons of groups in your greater performance review policy, that you don't want to be having your performance reviews to have a disparate impact on specific individuals in a protected class. You don't want them singled out subjectively for different treatment. Another great benefit of performance reviews is it's a way to increase your organizational efficiency in a lot of ways. You can identify your overperforming employees, AKA the star workers. Lets you know who's really going above and beyond. Can also identify your underperforming employees, as we touched on, who need some help with their work. Doing this process too, getting these information from employees as you do a performance review with them, can help you discover important retention factors for your organization. I know that's a big concern right now for a lot of employers. How do we keep our people? Through a performance review, you can get feedback on how's the company culture, how's your pay structure, what do the employees think of the work-life balance, what do they think of your benefits? Those are kind of important factors that you can pull out of a performance review as an organization, not just tell the person how they're doing, but get information back from them that benefits your organization overall for keeping your employees. Reviews can also be used to find employee promotional opportunities. Who do you want to bring up to the next level? Who is maybe that star worker who could become a supervisor or manager down the road? With reviews, that's an opportunity for you to get the feedback, have the conversation, see if somebody can be bumped up. And even beyond just knocking somebody up a step to the supervisor level, it could also be useful for finding maybe future leaders of the entire organization, somebody that could go even higher in management. You may already have somebody on your internal team that could be a prospect for really being a good leader in the organization. Now, we've talked about some of the benefits to you as an employer for performance reviews, but what are some of the benefits for employees? Well, it's sort of self-explanatory, but we want to go through these anyway, just so that you make sure that you have those in your mind as you're considering starting doing performance reviews, or if you're currently doing them. These are some of the factors that are important to be considered. Awareness of the need for improvement. An employee might not know whether or not they're doing well, and sometimes a performance review is the only feedback, either positive or negative, that they receive on their job performance, which affects their opportunities for advancement, obviously. Employees who receive specific feedback are more likely to make the improvements requested by the employer because they're now aware of it. Maybe they didn't know, maybe they were oblivious, and that feedback through a performance review can make them feel more engaged in their work, more valued by the employer, and more connected to the business operation. That just really is one of those situations where a rising tide would lift all boats. That would help your organization to have employees have that level of engagement and awareness. That can be a true benefit to your organization. Whereas if you've got somebody who's not aware of their performance level or expectations of the company because they don't receive any feedback, or really super general feedback, they may feel undervalued and they might be less likely to meet your expectations within your organization. So there is really better opportunity for success if the employees feel that they are valued, they're connected, they know what's going on. I think that's an area that employers can take advantage of to help their overall operations. We do want to touch on an important issue, since we are advising on issues of employment law through the attorneys that myHRcounsel uses. We want to have performance reviews and litigation also be on your mind. If you are conducting performance reviews, some areas to be aware of. There's a lot of good that can come out of performance reviews, as we just talked about, but there's also risks that an employer needs to be aware of. And just to kind of give some background on that, unsatisfactory performance is one of the most common reasons that employers are going to let somebody go. Performance reviews are frequently used as evidence in employment litigation to show the employee's performance is either inadequate or satisfactory. So your performance review documentation has to be accurate, because it could be a two-way street in a litigation situation. It could either really help your organization, or it could be used against you if the performance review information doesn't match up with some other documentation or some other testimony that somebody gives. So you really want things to be aligned. And really, if somebody is let go, an employee is let go, and they bring a claim against their employer, one of the first documents that's going to be asked for, let's see your performance review documentation. If it comes down to there's no documentation, then it's going to be someone's memory, maybe the employee's memory versus a supervisor's memory of why somebody was let go. That's not very reliable. In a litigation situation, you really want to have good documentation so that there's no questions on the company's position on an issue. So one of the big risks that's shown on the screen is establishing pretext. That's one of the things that can be harmful to an employer if an employee sues and they want to see those performance review document. Pretext is basically a reason given as a justification for taking an action that's not the real reason. So with employment law, this can come into play with employees if they're disciplined, if they're terminated. They might say, well, they said that I was let go for this reason, but my performance reviews were excellent. So they're lying. They really let me go because I'm age 40 or older. I have a different religious background than the owner, something like that. So what you really want to make sure of is that you're not having something in your documentation that could be provably untrue, and that could lead to that pretext argument for an employee to use if they ever were to come after your company with some sort of claim. So you really do want to make sure that you've got good and accurate and truthful documentation so that you can really take out that pretext argument if an employee were to ever make a claim down the road and try to use the performance review documents in the litigation. The other risk is subjectivity. You just want to make sure that you can show in your performance review documentation that similarly situated employees have been treated in the same manner when it comes to how they're evaluated, what are the consequences, either positive or negative, of that evaluation. So again, got to watch the documentation in a performance review for pretext issues or subjectivity. Just wanted to touch on that so that you have that in your mind as you go forward and work on performance reviews. Let's talk about some best practices for performance reviews. These are just really good overall steps within the process if you're currently doing performance reviews, or if you're not doing them and you decide again as a best practice that you want to do those within your organization. These are some ideas to keep in mind as you go forward in the process. Number one, train your evaluators. Again, that could be, depending on the size of your organization, it could be the owner, it could be a manager, or it could be somebody in a bigger organization who's a designated human resources representative. So train those people who are doing the performance reviews and evaluations. You want to make sure that those performance reviews are well executed and done in a consistent manner. To do that, you want to make sure whoever is doing the performance reviews for your organization is trained. The training should emphasize that the reviews themselves should be objective, they should be clear, they should be accurate, and they should be timely. Again, objective, clear, accurate, timely. You also want to talk to your reviewers if they have concerns, such as how to let the person being reviewed know your expectations as an employer. What do you want of the employees as they're reviewed? How to communicate a negative review to an employee, and then how to have your evaluators answer common questions, things like compensation, opportunities for advancement. You also want to make sure that your evaluators are trained to understand they got to be careful to avoid a discrimination issue based on things like the employee's sex, which now includes by law gender, sexual orientation, gender identity, pregnancy, their age, race, their national origin, their religion, and any other membership in a protected class. You don't want to also ask too many questions as an evaluator where you could get into things like, oh, how are employees feeling? Are they thinking about starting a union? Something like that. You don't want to get into what's known as an unlawful and unlawful interrogation under the National Labor Relations Act. You want to focus more on strictly asking about or discussing the specific issues within the job itself, not necessarily broader employee activities that could relate to organization. You want to make sure that you're assessing employee performance using specific criteria. You want that to be as specific as possible. You can do reviews based on job groupings, such as the job titles. You could also do it categories of employees, so maybe full-time versus part-time, maybe exempt versus non-exempt. That will help you with consistency in going through the process, and it will also help you reduce some of the liability risks that we just discussed. In a review, you want to make sure that your person doing the review is assessing the particular job duties and responsibilities of the person, the employee's achievement, or if they have lacked achievement relating to specific targets and goals. And that could be things like their ability to take instruction, their communication, initiative, attitude. You want to hit on the specific needs and requirements of the job, as well as potentially some of those other things. Again, the attitude, ability, how are things going, that sort of thing. It's helpful if the person doing the review has some understanding of the position that they are reviewing the employee, the position of the employee who's being reviewed, I should say. The other thing that you want to look at is making sure that the reviewers are very straightforward. They want to have an independent assessment of each aspect of the employee's job performance, and look through, if you're going to do a formal performance review document, review that document. It should be reviewed by either the owner of the company, another senior manager, somebody, so that you can make sure that there's nothing in that document that could come back to bite you in terms of your policies, if you have union workforce, any collective bargaining stuff, and all laws related to non-discrimination, non-retaliation, those sorts of things. You want to be straightforward and honest when you're giving an employee review. That'll help get you out of some of those issues that we just discussed with either pretext or too much subjectivity. It's tough to discuss, and we all know this, if somebody is underperforming, but at the same time, if you just pass that person ahead and mark, everything's excellent, that's going to set you up for your documents potentially being used against you if somebody later has to be let go. You're in a better position if you are straightforward and honest as noted, and you can provide that constructive criticism to an employee who actually needs it. With the performance review and the documentation, you want to be detailed. It can be a time-consuming process, but if you have the detail in there, it's going to help you in the long run. If things are truthful, accurate, really do relate to the employee's performance. That way, if there's an issue that takes your documents out of the mix, it's something that can be used against you down the road. So as a reviewer, that individual should give the employee detailed examples of anything that they did right, that they're doing great, and then some ways to improve performance as well. Those are helpful portions of information to be, presented to them in a straightforward and honest manner. You also want to, in a straightforward and honest manner, identify any instances of poor performance or underperformance. When you discuss any types of issues like that, you should try to be, as a reviewer, non-confrontational, focus strictly on performance problems, and all those should be documented, by the way. Be open and listen to the employee's comments, and then try to identify ways to address or improve the problems if you possibly can with that person. At the end of the interview, you might want to give the person, and this is, again, getting into the details, you want to give them some expectations, some goals that are specific, strategies for meeting goals, timeframes, and consequences if somebody doesn't meet those goals. You want to also, as a reviewer, avoid inappropriate factors, such as you don't want to criticize in detail somebody's absenteeism due to intermittent leave. Leave sometimes can be protected by law, or you don't want to get into somebody's distinct appearance if they're wearing religious related clothing. Those are the kind of details you don't want to get into either in a discussion or documented in the document of the performance review. You do want to take employee feedback into account. The reviewer should allow enough time to discuss the performance review with the employee and be prepared to thoroughly listen to the employee's comments and concerns. Employees should be given an opportunity to provide feedback about how they're doing. If there are problems with the employee, the reviewer should try to give the employee an opportunity to make suggestions on how to resolve any of those problems. And any comments that the employee offers during the performance review should be noted. On the performance review itself, maybe there's a note section at the end. And after the review is completed, the reviewer and the employee should discuss what was talked about during the meeting and have somebody sign off on a final version of the review. If an employee refuses to sign a performance review, and this does happen, sometimes they do that with discipline documents as well. With the performance review document, the reviewer should indicate on the review itself, on the final document, say individual refused to sign, and then maybe have a third party serve as a witness if you've got an issue that you're concerned about with a specific employee. That helps you avoid, as an employer, a claim that the employee did not receive the feedback that was presented in the review. Sometimes people try to squirm around to get out of that. Another thing that is important to do when conducting performance reviews is to avoid certain types of language. In addition to the legally risky language that could be construed as retaliation, discrimination, harassment, something like that, you want to avoid emotional, sarcastic, or unnecessary language. The reviewer should not be emotional during the process. Sometimes I know, especially maybe in smaller organizations, it could be easier for a reviewer to try to have, some sarcastic comments or some humor, joke around with the person if they're talking about maybe the employee's lack of performance in a certain area, and that gets into an uncomfortable conversation, but that should be avoided. Instead, focus on the assessment of the employee. Keep it on the facts of how they're performing. If you're not being jokey, you're being more straightforward, that's going to help your organization because it's going to minimize your risk of misunderstandings and miscommunications. I mean, it's known that people who are performing job reviews or performance reviews can sometimes feel uncomfortable, can be a little tense when you're discussing somebody's performance and it's not the greatest ever, and there can be a tendency just as a human being to kind of go off on a tangent or be a little indirect with what you're saying. But it's best to just really stick to the main issues at hand, and again, have your manager, supervisor, even if you're the owner of the company, have some resources or training that is provided prior to doing the performance review so that you're aware of the best practices to help minimize your risk as you go through the process. Another best practice for performance reviews, hey, be timely. Where you have performance review schedule, sometimes an employee handbook might say, yeah, we conduct performance reviews twice a year, once a year. If you've got a schedule, stick to it. If you don't follow the schedule, that can create liability for your business. Make sure that you're not saying one thing regarding frequency of performance reviews and then your actions are different from that. That undermines your process and can undermine the credibility of your organization if an issue comes up with an employee or a former employee down the road. A lot of employers do one sit-down formal performance review each year, but from what we're seeing in some of our materials that we look at to stay on top of trends in employment law, and what we're also hearing from some of our clients, is that more employers are now conducting at least 2 formal reviews a year, one at the beginning of the calendar or fiscal year, and then one at the midpoint of that calendar or fiscal year. And that's what we're looking at today is, what is the point, or what is the benefit of a mid-year performance review? So what are the benefits of a mid-year performance review? Why is it good? Why should we think about doing this? We're currently doing 1 formal performance or review a year, for example, and now we're thinking about moving to 2. Well, why should we do that mid-year review? Well, there's a number of benefits to a mid-year performance review. More frequent feedback leads to less surprises for the employee. That's kind of a big deal, because you really don't want an employee to feel surprised, blindsided by some negative feedback. If they are, that increases the risk for an employer that employee is going to turn around and contact a state agency, contact an employee side plaintiff's attorney for some type of claim. You're better off providing more frequent and consistent feedback to keep that surprise factor down for an employee, so that they know that they're doing great, or they know that they're not doing so well. Another important reason to do a mid-year performance review is it increases your documentation level on how an employee is doing. As we discussed a little bit earlier in this presentation, the important factor, or one of the main important factors to consider when you're doing performance reviews, is to make sure that you've got the thorough documentation, the detailed documentation, and the accurate documentation, so that those writings can't be, again, used against you in some sort of claim down the road, claiming they were pretext or something like that would hurt your organization. You want more documentation of the employee's performance, and you want it to be accurate. Mid-year performance review also provides an opportunity for improvement on kind of a quicker basis. An employee can be told, hey, we need you to pick up in this area and do a little bit better, versus waiting another 12 months until that occurs with an annual performance reviews. There's more opportunities to really keep the conversation going, keep the feedback going. That can help your overall organization be more efficient, keep the employee morale up, those sorts of things. And you want all of these important items in place to help reduce your risk. I mean, that's really what we do for you, and that's what employers need, is to just keep in mind, how can I keep my risk down? What do I need to do to make sure that I can operate efficiently and effectively and not run outside of the lines where I could have some sort of claim come back against me brought by an employee? And really, with performance management overall, there are some pretty main points that you want to consider. Again, this kind of piggybacks on what we've been talking about. It doesn't always have to be once or twice a year on a formal basis. It can be done daily. There can be feedback just saying, hey, that was great, or oh, wait a second, I see that something got missed there. This would be an opportunity to just make you aware of that and make sure that you do this properly. That allows you to correct issues very quickly. Again, it's reducing that employee surprise factor. If you're blindsiding somebody at the beginning of the fiscal year or the calendar year, hey, it's your review. By the way, you've been doing these things wrong for the last 11 months. That's going to create more possible risk for you as an employer. You want to keep that process going steadily, and a review on a daily basis, and I'm using air quotes around the review word, could be just a verbal correction like we talked about, or it could be verbal praise. Hey, I saw you got that batch of projects done ahead of time. That's great. We appreciate you, rising up to that level of performance. And remember, it doesn't matter how frequently reviews are conducted. You want to just make sure that any feedback is provided, whether it's annually, doing a mid-year performance review, or even less formal. You want to give fair, consistent, and regular feedback to your employees. All right, this is sort of an important topic as well. We've got the best practices, but we also want to talk about the pitfalls that you want to steer clear of when you're doing performance reviews. We sort of touched on subjectivity. That was in line with the pretext slide we looked at earlier. You want to have broad criteria that are, you want to have the criteria that are applied equally to employees who are similarly situated. You don't want to single somebody out for different treatment who's in the same position as someone else where they did not get the same level of scrutiny through a review. You want to make sure that you're being very consistent with your application. It's not just drilled down subjectively on one person. You want to avoid ambiguity. You want clear and specific review information provided both verbally during a performance review and in your post-performance review written report. Any employee that receives a performance review document that has a lot of ambiguity in it or broad statements that don't apply to them, they're not really going to improve if you want them to improve, because the expectations are going to be seen to be unclear. Also, with just real broad statements that don't allow an employee the chance to improve, that would hurt you if there was ever any type of claim that a government agency or a court was looking at. If they looked at the documentation and said, well, this doesn't help this person, or this is just too broad of a statement and it doesn't focus on this person's specific performance in the specific job, that could hurt you as an organization because they won't, again, know your expectations. This is a really important pitfall to avoid: inaccuracy. Sometimes the wording that's spoken during the performance review or what's written in the final performance review document, it might be not completely accurate because the reviewer doesn't want to hurt the employee's feelings. Or if the reviewer is too rushed, they might not detail all of the notes needed from the performance review. There's also a fear sometimes that if an employee is maybe a little bit unpredictable, they're a little volatile, they don't want to write something in a performance review that could generate a strong negative reaction. It's still very important, however, even with those factors that are, it's completely human if you're a reviewer to want to avoid some of those issues with the employee, but it's also important that you have accurate information in your performance review to protect your organization overall. It also will help you put the employee on notice of where they actually need to improve. That really is an important factor if you can get the accurate information within there. You also, as we just discussed, you want to avoid being off schedule. If you're doing performance reviews formally once a year, twice a year, quarterly, whatever it is, if that's been communicated to employees, you've got to stick to that schedule. If you don't follow that schedule, you're going to get employees who are going to be a little bit upset. It shows that the company maybe isn't fully squared away in the process. That could also, again, be a fact that's used against an employer if there's ever any kind of claim or investigation by a government agency or a court based on something an employee is saying went wrong. If you're not on your schedule, that could be an issue that could be used against you. So how we can help in myHRcounsel with the performance review process. We can advise on the overall steps that you need to take. We've talked about it here in this presentation, but as you go through the process, questions may come up. Let us know. If you're one of our clients, you submit a ticket to us through our portal. That's one way that we can help you. We can also discuss best practices with you. What's acceptable to do with your performance review? What maybe are some things that if you're doing a performance review might push the edge of the envelope of where you want to be. We can also help you examine risk. We can help you evaluate your current process, provide advice on what to do. Basically, as sort of an overview, you don't want to use protected characteristics like race, sex, national origin, and in ethnicity when making concrete employment decisions that are related to conducting performance review. That's kind of the bottom line. You want to have a consistent process, and you also want to have sufficient detail and accuracy within your performance reviews so that employees are getting honest feedback, and that'll help them improve overall. And just a couple of last closing notes here as we get close to the end. Thank you, number one, for joining us. We do really make your life easier with answers you can rely on. And for those of you that are already clients of myHRcounsel, you can find more information on performance reviews in our HR Solutions Center with the Performance Management Guide, as well as our Performance Evaluation Form. You can also, as one of our clients, of course, open a ticket at any time to have a conversation with our attorneys on your performance review processes.